Beneath the Duir. Hey there, rats and cats, and welcome back to round 6 of Invisible Black Moon Musings. To old and new, I'm honored and thrilled that you're joining me here as I dive down myriad rabbit holes and muse on what I find. This is a series of my moon letters from 2022 that I decided to record as audio and video versions. To repeat the pre-ramble for my newcomers, whilst these musings are not necessarily about the moon, I settled on writing for each new moon because it's the one we don't see. She dons her invisible cloak and reminds us that it's okay to take a moment to go into the darkness, recharge, and rebirth for a new cycle. The gravitational pull is equally powerful for the new moon as for the full, so she's proof that you don't need to see her to know she's there. And regardless of whether you're pure science, spiritual, or a concoction of both, I'm sure we can agree this powerful ball of energy can really pack a punch. This issue, number 6, was actually done around the solstice, which I know I'm now a month past, but a little more than a month actually. But because the solstice, whether it's winter or summer, is all about heading into that next phase, which is, a 6-month phase, I think it's still okay to do that now, and then hopefully I can catch up and record for the next new moon version. So you can catch up on the last 3. I think I started recording them from issue 3, I think. So there's a couple missing from the beginning, but they'll make it in there somewhere. So my intention had actually been to try and get this one out at least for the full moon, but then still, life lifed me. I'm actually filming this from an absolutely beautiful place in the center of Norway. I'm in a place that's in Valdres, pretty much in the center, near Jotunheimen, which is in Norse mythology the land of the giants. And I am here doing a very exciting project. So, and it is absolutely beautiful. I'm literally looking out on these beautiful fields and the mountains, and behind me is beautiful water, and it's gorgeous. So here we are doing it anyway. Please take a seat, engage brain portals, set your expectations to anything goes. Let's talk about the solstice, seeing as we're on t'other side of it. Well, a month on the other side, as I said, but moving right along. No matter which hemisphere you're in, it's a time of stillness and what happens inside that stillness, which seems to be a favourite topic of mine. The word solstice comes from the Latin solstitium, which literally means sun stands still, marking either the longest or the shortest day of the year. Here in the north, we celebrated the summer solstice, which gives us the longest day. But this equally means we have begun the descent into darkness and repair, not despair. In fact, side note, there's an old word from 1525 that combines them both. Respair. Repair and despair. Respair. It means fresh hope and a recovery from despair. Isn't that lovely? We need some of that in our lives and in the world right now for sure. Now, I have quite the racing mind, which I am as excited as I am exhausted by. The images, thoughts, and dreams that come with it are a massive part of who I am, and I wouldn't be without them, but they're certainly draining at times, and so demand regular moments of stillness. I don't know about you, but my kind of stillness isn't that pure silent kind we're so often told or encouraged to aspire to. For me, it's more about finding a stillness within the internal noise, which I generally prefer. I don't dislike the noise, I just need it to remember to share. There's definitely something magical, though, about knowing a shared space is being held by others at certain times throughout the year, anywhere in the world, even if you're completely alone in your happy little hermit cave. It's fairly recent that I've taken more time for these kinds of days, and the last few years in particular have been quietly epic. One year I found myself in Tromsø, Norway, up in the Arctic Circle. On the solstice, I climbed the 1,200 Sherpa steps to Storsteinen, the big stone, basically. More than halfway up Fløye Mountain, and at 420 meters above sea level, I basked in the midnight sun, with a beer in hand for my efforts. Tromsø, home of the midnight sun and the northern lights, really is a high-energy place with such extreme light and darkness. I wasn't sure how I'd react to the 24/7 sun, but it definitely affected me more than I expected. Despite the light, even some late night walks felt quite eerie, almost hostile. In my first musing back in February, I talked about the particular noisy silence that comes with ice and snow. And while that can be unsettling at times, I'd say it feels more protective compared to this buzzing, open silence. Perhaps that constant sun just makes the energies go into overdrive, trying to feed everything so fiercely in the short time it has that it almost feels like drowning. It's like drinking more water when you're already full. Either way, there's no doubt in my mind that it affects the way you behave and respond to the space around. A bit like extreme heat waves back in Australia and other hot countries around the world, where you just feel different for a time. So if the solstice is the liminal space between summer and winter, then what's happening in that liminal space of day and night, captured within an unending light? I guess the same question goes for the long periods of darkness, but there is something different about the sun's energy, for sure. Well, moving on. A couple of years ago, I was in the UK visiting family I'd not seen in almost 4 years. And after a strange day of cancellations, tube strikes, and things generally being a bit strange, I endeavoured, with the help of my divine cousin-in-law, to make my way to the only stone circle in London. I'd read about this place while looking for somewhere to mark the day, and it was perfectly obscure. A mere babe of a circle, it was placed on the aptly named Hilly Fields. Cute, I know. For the millennium. The granite stones, however, are almost 400 million years old, coming all the way from Mount Duir in Scotland. So they've seen a thing or two. All this being said, you're possibly starting to wonder about the title of this musing and how it all connects to the solstice. What is a Duir, I hear some of you ask? Well, Duir is the Celtic name for the oak tree in the Ogham alphabet, representing the letter D and the lunar month which falls over the summer solstice. It also means doorway. So it's fitting for this time of year as we cross over the threshold. From an etymological perspective, things get quite exciting. In fact, it's more of a reverse etymology in a way, because Duir is the stem word. It's believed that the term druid derived from Duir, and if we go a little further, the Old Irish and Scottish Gaelic versions, drui, drow, for example, all translate in some form to magician, sorcerer, philosopher, tree knower, oak knower, or seer. The oak species has also graced us with her presence for, only around 65 million years. So she's earned this wisdom. I read somewhere that an oak is only considered old when she reaches 700 years of age, by which stage they're often so gnarly and hollowed out that they can look like they're dying, but mostly they're just modifying their bodies to support themselves and their ecosystems, like an old crone or wizard enveloping all the creatures of the forest under their cloak. Magic. One of my lovely moon muses here recently told me about an 800-year-old oak not far from where she lives, which is just like this. And apparently there's one more than 2,000 years old in California. With both masculine and feminine qualities, it's long been known as a tree of endurance, strength, and triumph. The wood was hardy enough to build ships from, but soft enough to carve into for decorations. And it was used to make actual doors to protect the threshold of your home and ward off evil spirits. And they not only survive, but thrive from lightning strikes. But wait, I tripped and fell into this next one. Duir is even thought to have connection to the word tor, which, though we now use as a particular term for hill, sparked some runaway thoughts on how people looked at hills in general. Did they view them all as gateways to the other world? Does that explain the use of burial mounds, escorting the dead to the other worlds via smaller, artificial hills? In any case, it's certainly fitting for the Glastonbury tour, another place I finally got to visit a week before the solstice, with a spectacular human of much knowing herself. But more of that for another musing, methinks. Even the name for Tor, or Thor, the Norse god of lightning, could derive from the term Duir, because the oak is his sacred tree, which, as I mentioned earlier, may in fact be because oaks are famous for withstanding lightning strikes, seen by the Druids as moments of inspiration and great insight. Okay, rabbit holes connecting on a labyrinthine level here. Don't you just love etymology and finding connections through different stories and across the seas, no less? Well, this feels like a good time to transition over to a quick story, because we all love a good story, don't we? And there's a rather great one about the cyclical battle of the Holly King and the Oak King that occurs at each solstice. The story itself, as with most myths and folklore, have varied details and versions, but the crux is that the oak and the hollyking go into battle with each other twice a year, with the hollyking winning at the summer solstice and the oak king at the winter solstice. At first it might seem strange, but it makes sense when you think that the oak, though in all its glory at the height of midsummer, is now preparing for the descent into darkness, to regenerate, while the hollyking prepares to take over and protect the land during the cold months. With this in mind, you could say that the solstice points are much like the waxing and waning of the moon cycles, just on a much, much larger scale. And with the oak and holly kings switching roles, it almost doesn't matter which hemisphere you're in, because the oak door swings both ways. Perhaps it's in knowing this that we can trust in the darkness, knowing the light will always return, and that just like the new and full moons, each has value and equal power. Also, at a root level, see what I did there? They need each other to survive. Well, I think that's a wrap for this month. I'm sure you can well believe I fell down myriad other burrows and furrows, including stories of Merlin and more, but we'd be here for days. So let's take a mutual breath and celebrate this post-solstice space as a gateway to the next thing. Whether you're in the waxing or waning phase of the year, the old oak has a major role to play. So if there's one near you, maybe go say hi. Lastly, I wrote a little poem about the Duir that I've popped below, hence the title. So, here we go, underground, through the doorway, beneath the big old oak tree. Perhaps in knowing its protective qualities, we can remember it as a safe place to reside during a time of death and renewal, curled up in its roots that stretch out wide, mirroring its own branches. See you by the dark of the next new moon. And if you'd like to support me and my work, you can actually head along to Ko-fi, ko-fi.visibelblack, and you can buy me a coffee, or 2 or 10, whatever you like. And I would be hugely grateful for anything that helps me along this path to wherever it is I'm going. Or you can head along to my Linktree, which is linktr.ee/visibelblack once more. And you can see all the other rabbit holes that I live in right there. Okay, that's it for me, and here is the poem. Beneath the Duir. Secrets at the threshold. Bells of sound leap and buzz. I feel silence. Blazing light, roots take hold, a breeding ground beneath the Duir. The doorway opens. Descent begins. Repeating lines, proof life abounds. Darker now, yet breathing. Pulsing tendrils of life. Into the shadows we go. Here in the north, we celebrated the summer solstice. The story itself, as with most... What?